Hello everybody, this is Manu-S and welcome back to the last part of my Eternal set review. Today we're going to talk about the multi-faction cards and the factionless cards to wrap up the series. This is going to be part 1 of 4 like usual, or actually 3 parts this time because we don't have that many cards. So let's get started. Okay. First we have Magus of Ofcelerity. I think this card's pretty awesome. Giving charge on Inspire is really powerful. The Scout gives it some nice utility and also makes sure that you have a much higher chance of actually hitting with your Inspire ASAP to get maximum impact. And yeah, charge is really powerful, especially with all the fatties and Praxis. And a 3/3 is a decent 3-drop, does some decent attacking and blocking, although the main goal is clearly utility here. I think this is a very good alternative to Merchants or the old Reliquary Raider that I used to run as a 3-drop. It's almost certainly better than Raider because it makes the deck even like more proactive, which is kind of what the deck wants to be anyway, and possibly even better than Merchants. I feel like Merchants are a bit overhyped right now, and Praxis is a very forward and tempo-oriented time mid-range deck, and Merchants are kind of like slower and more utilitarian. So if you ask me, it's either Magus of Celerity or maybe the Red Merchant, but like the Time Merchant is just not a card to go. And yeah, in Limited, this is an amazing card. The body is even better there since units are overall weaker, and yeah, just a great card. Next we have Recon Populate. This card seemed kind of nice at first, but the fact that it only hits attacking enemies is a pretty big issue. And it's fairly expensive, sure. You have Warp, but once again, since it's reactive, if the opponent isn't attacking the turn you have it on top of your deck, it doesn't help that you have 4 power and can Warp it, since you didn't get the opportunity, making the Warp a lot weaker. Reducing the cost of the top unit of your deck by the enemy unit's cost is pretty nice and can be a powerful boost. The problem is, this doesn't really fit into Praxis since it's too forward and like proactive in my opinion. So it goes more into some reactive control-ish decks, like say FTP Moment for example, would be a great fit. The problem is the deck has so few units that the cost reduction effect is pretty trivial, since you might not even draw the unit with the cost reduction early enough for it to even matter. Sure, it's nice to get a cheaper Heart of the Vault or a cheaper 8-cost Dragon, but either way, you have so few units it can take a long time till you draw your next unit. But technically, a spell that can be free and trades 1-for-1 and generates tempo seems like a great card for the deck, but in the end I think it just kind of doesn't fit, and I can't really think of another deck right now that I would want it in. So the card's a bit in an awkward spot. In Limited, however, this is a really great card, and if you're in Praxis colors, feel free to pick it up. Well, Crest of Glory, not much needed to say here. We all know how good crests are, and now we have our Recon crest too. Next we have Bullet Shaper, one of the more impactful, awesome new cards. We get a 2-cost 2/3, which is already a pretty solid deal. I think I mentioned plenty of times how important it is that a 2-drop has 3 health, no matter how much attack it has, simply because 3 health means it can block all 1-drops and most 2-drops, making it an effective blocker without just trading with 1-drops, which is really bad. So this locks down the early game ground a bit, so the opponent cannot simply ignore it and attack into it against more aggressive decks. That's really good. And yeah, it fixes your influence. It basically is like a Recano Stranger, gives you a Fire and a Justice influence, which is amazing, especially in like 3-faction decks like Fire, Justice, Shadow, Icaria, ramp decks with this. And yeah, that makes the ramp a lot more effective, since if you ramp your influence as well, it's much more likely that you can ramp into high influence cards like Icaria. And then the ultimate is awesome, getting to discard a spell to get 2 power this turn. I initially, when I saw the card the first time, thought I like missed the ultimate and thought that discard a spell was part of the summon, and then it would be a lot worse. Then it would just be like a bad Burning Tree Emissary for anyone that played Magic. But this way it's amazing. You can play this on turn 2, and turn 3 you can ramp out a 5-drop, and that's just so powerful, especially since this plays really well with Privilege of Rank, which we all know by now, making this an awesome discard outlet for Privilege of Rank, generating tons of card advantage and tempo. You get 2 Justice Sigils from 1 card for the cost of 0 power, or like for the cost of -2 power effectively, because you generate 2 power by doing that, and it's just so powerful. This is one of the most impactful and powerful cards in the new set. Can't stress that enough. And it happens to be a Gunslinger, which usually isn't relevant in the decks that it goes into, since they don't care about Gunslinger tribes, but it's just a bonus that can come up randomly in some other decks that people might be brewing. And in Limited, a 2-power 2/3 is a very decent 2-drop. If it fixes your influence, even better, and if it has the potential to just like do broken stuff, great, just pick it up. Next we have Adrians Choice, one of the better choices, and it's still a really bad choice. That should tell you something about the quality of the choices in the set. We get to kill an attachment on an enemy, so that means we can't kill curses. Even though they are enemy attachments, they are not an attachment on an enemy. We can also not kill Permafrost, because it's an enemy attachment. Well, it's a curse, so we can't kill cursed attachments, or like regular curses, or cursed relics, which is pretty problematic, because those are the 2 that you usually want to kill the most. Like killing random weapons on enemy units, not that great. Killing relic weapons is decent, but it's not a fast spell, so it's not very good at that either. And the alternate mode is you create and draw a 4/4 Mithril armor, like an Aegean armor, but that effectively gives you a +4/+4 armor for 6 power, which is terrible. So yeah, the card's pretty bad. In Limited it's decent, but in Constructed this is unplayable. Next we have Recon, another pretty powerful card in the new set. People didn't like it that much in the beginning for whatever reason, and were like skeptical, oh, it is reckless and it has only 4 health against Auric Runehammer and blah, but it doesn't really matter. It's a 6-drop flyer that potentially drains for 3 the turn it comes down by killing like a small unit or relic weapon and gaining you 3 health if your deck can support enough spells to turn on the lifesteal, and even without the lifesteal it's still good. And then you still are left with a 5/4 flyer. The reckless only really matters if they have like a Titan that you can't stop. There's not a lot of units this recklessly attacks into that punish it. It's like Titan and a melee most of the time. The rest of the stuff is just trading with it or not even able to trade. So yeah, the card's really powerful. It's a really strong 6-drop. 6-drops that have an immediate board impact like this, dealing 3 damage, are really, really powerful. It's not as good as Heart of the Vault, but it's also like much closer to Heart of the Vault than a lot of people realize, really. Then we have another Crest. Combray got its Crest, whoop whoop. Next we have a Lassie Combray Archmage. This is a really cool card that initially was a bit of a sleeper, but after a couple days people started messing around with it. Like when I personally saw the card first, for example, I thought it was really powerful, but the problem was that I initially didn't really know where to start with experimenting with her and like finding a shell for her, because the problem is Justice and Time are not the go-to spell factions. So that's the main problem. But yeah, you can pair her with like Fire or Primal or Shadow in a like 3-faction type deck, and then you quickly get enough good spells to make her really, really powerful. And you can also combine her with Crownwatch Press Gang, like Edayama, for example, has done. And that is also really powerful, especially with the buff that Crownwatch Press Gang got a while ago. This is a really, really strong duo that you can start building decks around, basically. And in Limited, depends on your deck how playable she is, really. Next we have Sword of Unity. I think the card is worse than it might seem to some people. The problem is, effectively, the strength of Stand Together comes from the fact that it's a fast spell and can blow out opponents with sweepers or clunky removal, which this can't, and this is effectively a 6 cost plus 3/3 lifesteal Overwhelm Aegis to 1 unit, and +1/+1 in Aegis to the rest of your units. So this is still pretty powerful, but it's also pretty situational and clunky. You need enough units in play, you need 6 power, you need to not be losing yet, you also need to not be winning so hard that it doesn't matter. So yeah, this kind of goes mostly into a token style go wide deck, like curving, say, Humbug Swarm into this seems pretty decent and so on. So there might be like a good like kind of a utility unit token throwaway unit deck that wants Obelisk and this in addition to Obelisk and maybe some actual stand-togethers to just buff your team as much as possible. So yeah, definitely an interesting card, but fairly specific in what it does. And a limited, this is a slam dunk bomb. Next we have arguably the most awful choice in the set, Syrah's Choice. I mean, Syrah is great, but her choices are awful. We basically get to pay 8 power, non-fast, to double the attack and health of our units this turn. So basically a bad overrun for anyone that's coming from Magic, since we don't get Overwhelm, and a bunch of units get worse buffs than Overwhelm. And the alternative is we get to tutor for a unit and double their stats. Units you want to tutor for usually don't care too much about their stat size. You care about finding them reliably and finding them early and finding them cheap enough. So this is not a realistic option. This is just a really terrible card. In limited, this might be barely playable, but 8 cost cards are like very borderline in most formats. And yeah, but the first mode can be a decent finisher in limited, but even in limited I think the card's pretty bad. Next we have Derry Cathane, Ripclaw Rider. This is kind of a cool card because it's a 2-drop that's an explorer and a dinosaur, so it triggers Evelina and also gets buffed by Evelina and turns into a decent threat later. And has a nice utility summon, increase the cost of a spell in the enemy hand by 1, like for example the Harsh Rule, and gives you some information. And later you can pay 3 to give her, I think it's a her +4 attack and Overwhelm if you have 2 or more spells in your void. That's the trickier part because you kind of like need to fit enough spells into that like dinosaur deck. But this might also be cool in some control decks. Like this seems like a decent 2-drop for Chalice potentially, turning into a threat, into a bigger threat later, kind of like a similar card to Chthon, although the summon is less effective there, but it can also be used to activate Chalice twice and so on. So yeah, the card definitely has some nice potential. It's not the greatest card in the world, but it's an interesting card. And in limited, this is pretty good overall, I would say, if you have some spells. And last but not least for the first part, we have Thurso's Choice. Another choice that's not super good, but it's at least a decent choice, at least for like the market. I don't see this usually making it into main decks though. You gain an Aegis and 6 health, so it provides a really nice stabilizer protection card that makes sure you don't like get burned out when you're like trying to draw out the game after you're stabilized to eventually win. And the other thing is like a makeshift sweeper, deal 2 damage to each unit at fast speed. So yeah, this the appeal of this card mostly comes from the fact that it provides 2 effects at an okay cost, although not great, in one card for your market that only has 5 slots, so it's just very slot effective basically. And in limited, this seems like a decent option, but also not great if you ask me. Alright, that's it for the first part of the multi-faction and colorless cards. So see you in a moment with part 2.